Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Sunday, January 7th, our first podcast of 2024. What is going on, guys? Hopefully, this is the last time I will have to apologize for a delay in between episodes. I know the Words with Wallace fans are clamoring for more consistent episodes from me, and you know what they say, right? New year, new me. Nah, not really. Just had to take some time to get settled in after, again, traveling for the holidays, getting caught up with work stuff, all that good stuff, and more importantly, just kind of catching up on watching basketball. Felt like I wasn't watching as much hoop as I needed to. Now I've been kind of glued to my couch over the past week or so, and we are back to talk about what exactly we missed. So, as you guys can tell by the title of this episode, we are going to be focused on the Golden State Warriors today. Had a really tough loss earlier this week. I've been in a bit of a tailspin, a lot of news stories coming out around the team. And so we're going to dive into just how bad are things in Golden State? What can Golden State do to kind of get out of the rut that they are in right now? But before we get into that, and that'll of course be the meat and potatoes of this episode, we had a trade. It was about a week ago. I think that was probably the biggest NBA news story that I missed since my last podcast in late December. And we're going to go through it. It was between the New York Knicks and the Toronto Raptors. And I thought this was pretty fascinating. A lot of you guys might have heard this already because, again, this did happen a little over a week ago. But it's kind of worth talking about, and maybe that this is a sign to come. Now that trade season is officially upon us, right? We are a little bit more than a month out from the trade deadline, which takes place in mid-February. So obviously we're still a ways away from things kind of heating up. But again, I do think this will be a sign to come in the NBA. So let's get started. Again, the trade between the Toronto Raptors and the New York Knicks. What exactly went down? Well, the New York Knicks received OG Anunoby, who was finally traded after seemingly being involved in trade rumors over the past about 3 years, give or take. So they received OG Anunoby, Malachi Flynn, and Precious Achiuwa. And the Toronto Raptors received RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and a 2024 second-round pick of the Detroit Pistons. Let's start things off by analyzing this trade from the perspective of the New York Knicks. First and foremost, I like this move for the Knicks. I feel like at this point in time, it's pretty difficult to dispute that OG Anunoby is not the best player involved in the deal again right now. He is kind of the gold standard in the NBA for 3-and-D players. That's why he's obviously been involved in so many trade rumors over the past, several years. Really because every team can use at least one guy like him, preferably a few guys like him to kind of complement some of your star players. And I think that was kind of the Knicks thinking in this deal. It's like, hey, we're pretty competitive right now. At the time of recording, they're 20-15. They're currently the 7th seed in the East. And while I don't think that this trade necessarily changes the Knicks' destiny by any means, like as a Celtics fan, I'm not super scared of the New York Knicks, while I do think it makes their team better for this season. But at least they kind of have a direction, right? They're like, hey, we're trying to win now. We're trying to be competitive. We're trying to see what we have. And maybe now they're, the next angry star away from being extremely competitive in the Eastern Conference. But the important thing is that, again, OG Anunoby and his play style is a great complement to what they have as their core in Jalen Brunson mainly, and then, of course, Julius Randle as well. Quickley obviously shows a lot of potential. He was kind of the runner-up for Sixth Man of the Year last year, a guy that I picked to win that award this year. So RIP to any Quickley Sixth Man of the Year bets. It looks like he's going to be the starter over in Toronto. So that's kind of a downside of this trade, at least in my opinion, because now my pick is kind of busted there because I do think he would have won it again. But Quickley's really talented, right? He was definitely one of the Knicks' 5 best players. But the issue is that he's a small guard, and the Knicks' best player is also a small guard. So it didn't really make sense to play Brunson and Quickley alongside each other more than like a few minutes per game. And so he was never really going to get the role that he deserved and needed in New York. So I think it makes sense that the Knicks were willing to part ways with Quickley, even though he's an ascending player and is really talented. And then finally, they threw in the towel on RJ Barrett as well, right? That's kind of the other big piece. Obviously, I think Barrett was, the 3rd pick in that draft a couple years back in 2019. A guy that was a top-ranked high school recruit and a top-ranked recruit heading into his time at Duke. But that being said, I don't think that RJ Barrett leap was ever really coming, right? That's kind of what the Knicks probably arrived on. He's just been really inconsistent as a shooter and as a scorer. And the Knicks just kind of showed that they didn't feel like having RJ Barrett on the court to close games lately gave them the best chance to win, right? He wasn't really consistent enough as a perimeter defender. Again, wasn't consistent enough as a shooter. And he just didn't really show the development signs where they felt like they were trading a guy that has a chance to turn into a superstar player. Now, I think RJ Barrett's an extremely useful player. I think, all 30 teams would probably use him on their roster. But again, I just don't think he fits that, obviously, 3-and-D OG Anunoby role as good as OG can. So they finally kind of threw in the towel on that. And I do actually think that Precious is sneaky a nice pickup for the Knicks as well, just because of how hammered they've been in terms of their front court depth, we should say, right? Like Mitchell Robinson's now out for the season. You got Hartenstein, and I think Jericho Sims kind of filling in minutes, but I think Sims got hurt as well. So they're really hurting as far as big men, and I think Precious could be a nice little guy to eat up minutes off the bench. When a team signs Taj Gibson, I know that's Coach Tom Thibodeau's guy. But that's usually a sign of desperation, right? Taj Gibson is well past his prime at this point. I think Precious can give them some nice minutes. And again, I think the Knicks have more of a direction. Again, I don't think it makes them like a real contender or anything like that, but I would kind of pick them to make that climb up to the 4 seed in the East. I think everything in the East is pretty wide open outside of the top 3 seeds. Of course, those being Boston, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia. After that 4 seed is kind of up for grabs, and I think that is the Knicks seed to lose right about now. So again, I like this move for the Knicks. It gives them more direction, and it just kind of, OG is a really good fit for what they have going on in that team right now. And there's really no shame in a team, kind of rolling the dice to at least make themselves a little bit better. Finally, let's look at this from the Raptors' perspective as well. I really like this deal for the Raptors as well. For a team that's 14-21 and they are the 12th seed in the East, it makes sense for them to kind of roll the dice and get 2 younger, kind of lottery ticket type players, right? We kind of know what OG is at this point in time. He's definitely kind of in his prime right about now. I don't think he's going to take any real leap. But the Raptors kind of have 2 swings at the plate where, like, hey, I said OG is the best player in the deal right now, but a couple years from now, I could see Quickly or RJ Barrett ending up being the best player that's involved in this deal. And it makes sense that they would take that type of swing in the position that they're in. They desperately needed a guard that can shoot from the perimeter, so obviously Quickly is going to be a better fit at the starting point guard spot than Schroeder, even though Schroeder's been pretty solid for Toronto this season as well. And I think nobody really needed a change of scenery more than RJ Barrett, right? Like I mentioned, he hadn't been closing games for the Knicks. He gets to come home. He's actually from Toronto, so I'm sure RJ is quite excited about that. And just has a lot of a longer leash to make those mistakes. Because when you're a playoff team in the Eastern Conference in a really competitive NBA, obviously Tibbs proved that he did not want him out there at the end of games. And so hopefully RJ has a little bit of a chance to be more creative with the ball in his hands and be more of a secondary scorer on that team and a really good complement to Scotty Barnes. So I think that makes a lot of sense from the Raptors' perspective. And also, a sneaky bonus to this deal for the Raptors as well is like, hey, I know that they got a 2nd-round pick, but that's this year's 2nd-round pick of the Pistons, which if you guys have not been up to date on what's happening in Detroit, they currently sit at 3 wins in early January, so that's not great. So basically that 2nd-round pick, you can kind of look at it through the same lens as a late 1st-round pick of this upcoming draft, which definitely has more value than most 2nd-round picks out there. So I think this move is about as good as you can get for the Raptors at this point in time. But the question that it kind of begs to ask is like, was this better than the alleged, 3 1st-round picks that the Raptors could have accumulated for OG Anunoby had they moved him last year? That's a good question. Probably not. But at the same time, do we really know if a team actually offered 3 1st-round picks for OG Anunoby? You never really know, what the protections are for those picks. 3 1st-round picks of, the Celtics or the Thunder or something like that. Do you really want those picks at this point in time? Probably not. So we didn't know exactly the value of those 3 1st-round picks. And getting 2 players that I think, on their own, I think Quickly could go for a 1st-round pick. I think RJ Barrett could as well. So I do think that this is basically on par with some of those offers that were floated out by the Raptors last year. And it's good to know that, hey, you get known commodities, right? You never know what those draft picks could become. You could always draft a bust. And we know for certain that, regardless of what you think of RJ Barrett not living up to his potential, he's definitely not a bust, and neither is Emmanuel Quickly. So getting some known commodities to help build around Scotty Barnes and get hopefully some better perimeter shooting out there is going to be good for the Raptors in the long term. So overall, I think this trade is a dead heap. I think it makes sense. There's clearly, At this point in time, I don't think there's an obvious winner. I know we always love putting a winner and a loser on a trade the second after it happens, which is just, pretty incorrect to do that in general. But I think it makes sense completely for both sides. And what I do think as well is that this could be a sign to come of future deals for the Toronto Raptors, right? It seems like they've picked a direction. Obviously, what they've seen this season so far is that Scotty Barnes has made a massive leap from last season, a leap that they were hoping to see. He's clearly the centerpiece of the franchise at this point in time. So I think it would make sense if they eventually move Pascal Siakam as well. He's still a really productive player for the Raptors that can command some significant draft capital and young players for any team that want to add Pascal Siakam to their roster. So again, I think that this is a sign of things to come, and I would expect Pascal to be moved to another, contending team within the next few weeks here. We'll see if Toronto is able to complete the overhaul of their roster and have some direction with some young pieces moving forward. Let's move on to talking about what exactly is going on with the Golden State Warriors. So, of course, this is a team that I'm always going to be bullish on. Again, as you guys know, Steph is my favorite player ever. I'm always going to feel like they have a chance to win the title with Steph still in the late prime of his career. But now with their recent struggles, it kind of begs the question, are they still contenders? What has been going on lately? And it's just been a really tough week overall for the Golden State Warriors, despite the fact that yesterday it was actually announced that Draymond Green has been reinstated from his indefinite suspension. So as we kind of talked about last episode, we know that Draymond Green received an indefinite suspension about a month ago at this point in time, maybe a little bit less, when he backhanded Yusuf Nurkic, connected with the side of his head, really could have hurt Yusuf Nurkic, and so he was suspended indefinitely for that act. Now, of course, it is going to be a bit of a ramp-up period for Draymond that the Warriors announced, since they just found out yesterday that he is going to be coming back to the team. So it's going to take Draymond about a week before we expect to see him return to action. That would put him on pace to play next Saturday, which is January 13th against the Bucks. That's probably my best guess as to when he'll be back, which would kind of make it a totality of 15 games missed for Draymond. If we're checking out the punishment and seeing if that tracks and if I think it's fair, I think for the most part, 15 games for, how terrible of an encore act that we saw from Draymond, I think that makes sense. I would have even, would have been okay to see it go as high as 20 games, to be honest with you, just because of the recent history and how much Draymond has been warned by the league, how much the league has kind of cracked the hammer down on him. You really can't afford to be seriously hurting somebody. And again, I think that was the worst thing that Draymond's ever done on a basketball court. But regardless, he is going to be back. And in the 12 games that Draymond has missed so far, the Warriors are 7-5 without him. So it's not like they've been completely struggling without Draymond. They've actually been better without Draymond than the pace that they were on previously, because overall the Warriors are 17-18. They're below 500 right now, and they're currently sitting at the 10 seed in the West. And it's not just the standings that are really ugly for a team that has, who I believe is still a top 5 to 7 player in the entire league in Steph. But it's exactly what happened the past week, and really was highlighted with that brutal loss that they had against the Denver Nuggets on Thursday, January 4th. Now, obviously, in a nutshell, losing to the Nuggets is, nothing to be ashamed of. I think the Nuggets are obviously one of the 2 best teams in the entire league. But it was really just the manner in which the Warriors blew that game that was really upsetting and has led to some interesting stories coming out of that Golden State locker room. So the Warriors actually put up a season-high 44 points in the third quarter in that game Thursday against the Nuggets. They ended up heading into the fourth quarter with a 13-point lead, and things were looking pretty good. Even with just 5 minutes left in the game, the Warriors were clearly in the driver's seat. They were up 14 with 5 minutes left. Aaron Gordon actually hits a 3 in the corner to cut the lead down to 11. And there's one play specifically that I wanted to focus on because it was pretty interesting, and it seemed like there was some instant karma for the Warriors. Because after Aaron Gordon hit that 3, cut the lead down to 11 with about 5 minutes left in the game, for some reason Jokic decided to pick up Warriors rookie Brandon Podziemski full court. Podziemski's trying to bring the ball up, and Jokic looked to try to pressure him. It did look like there was some weird contact there, and Podziemski might have pushed off a little bit. And Jokic basically flopped and went to, looked like he was trying to sell an offensive foul on Podziemski. No call was made, but eventually I believe Golden State called timeout. But right before both teams went to their respective benches for the timeout, Steve Kerr actually exchanged some words with Jokic that was pretty interesting. It looked like he kind of was again directly addressing Jokic, and he was like, "Come on, man!" Like giving Jokic crap for trying to sell that call or whatever, and he just kept saying like, "Come on, man! Like today's not your day. Today is not your day." And immediately, again, the Warriors were hit with some instant karma, and the Warriors proceeded to basically not score the rest of the game. The 13-point lead evaporated, and essentially it was capped off by a 40-foot bank shot from Jokic at the buzzer, which gave the Nuggets the win 130 to 127. So it was a total meltdown. Again, when I actually put this game on, it was basically tied in the third quarter. The Warriors rip off a massive run. I think they got up as much as 20 at one point in time. And obviously, again, had a 13-point lead with just a few minutes left in that game, just to end up blowing it and just having no fourth quarter offense whatsoever to close that game. And so while that was bad, it was actually the stories that came out the next day from the Golden State locker room that were even worse. It was actually pointed out by many people in the media that Jonathan Kuminga was in the midst of a really great game on Thursday against the Nuggets. He had 16 points on 5 of 7 shooting, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and was actually a team high plus, plus 6 in just 19 minutes of action. And then he actually never played the rest of the game after being taken out halfway through the third quarter. So again, Jonathan Kuminga was basically the Warriors' best player through 3.5 quarters, just for him to be put on the bench and not put in the rest of that game. And so immediately after the day after that game, and the day after Jonathan Kuminga was benched, there was a report from Shams Charania of The Athletic titled, "Warriors, Jonathan Kuminga has lost faith in coach Steve Kerr." And so, the article didn't, reveal too much. It went on to just explain how frustrated Jonathan Kuminga has been without being able to carve out a truly consistent role in this team. It seems like Steve Kerr's rotation has been all over the place, and it's definitely taken a toll on some of the younger players in this locker room. And that was not the only negative report to be released that day. Moses Moody, who I've talked a little bit about on this podcast, obviously a lottery pick for the Warriors a couple years back. It looked like him and Jonathan Kuminga were two of the Warriors' more promising young players. They've obviously already cut bait on James Wiseman last year, who was a busted lottery pick for them as well. But I just wanted to read some of the recent minutes for Moses Moody in some of these Warriors games, which again have all been without Draymond Green. In order of most recent to least recent, his minute logs are as follows: 6 minutes, 0 minutes, 0 minutes, 0 minutes. So again, 3 consecutive DNPs, 13 minutes, 3 minutes. Again, all without Draymond Green. And of course, after that Jonathan Kuminga report on Friday the 5th, basically an identical report came out from Moses Moody's camp saying that they were also frustrated with Moses Moody's role and that he had expressed some frustration with head coach Steve Kerr. So where does that leave us, right? It's really discouraging that the Warriors, they really didn't have that bad of an offseason, right? They drafted 2 rookies who have actually been really impressive and given them really consistent minutes in Brandon Podziemski, who we just talked about, who's been a really nice pick for them, I believe he was a first-round pick, and then Trace Jackson Davis as well, kind of playing that power forward position for the Warriors. Looks like he has really high IQ, has been really skilled for the Warriors basically all season. Even Dario Saric has given the Warriors nice, big man minutes, if you even want to consider him a big. He's probably the closest thing they have to that, and he's been really solid alongside of Kevon Looney to basically provide backup big minutes. And I even think the Chris Paul Jordan Poole transaction looks like a positive for the Warriors. Poole has actually the lowest plus minus in the entire NBA, which is just kind of a fun fact. Obviously, he plays for Washington, the second worst team in the league behind Detroit. And I think Chris Paul has been pretty solid and has been able to provide a spark to the Warriors' second unit and occasionally closing games for them. So despite all the things that have gone well for the Warriors this offseason, the fact that we're sitting here in early January and they're below 500, these reports are coming out, it really just goes to show that Kerr is really struggling to find a consistent rotation and manage the minutes on this roster. It actually almost got a lot worse, and we would be sitting here with probably a higher panic meter rating scale if the Warriors had actually dropped their game the day after on Friday the 5th. They played a home game to the Detroit Pistons and nearly lost. The game was actually tied with a few minutes left, and if it wasn't for Steph scoring 14 points in the fourth quarter, they definitely would have dropped that game to the Pistons. Now, I know just a couple weeks ago, my Celtics damn near lost to the Detroit Pistons at home, who had 2 wins at that time, and the Celtics were still undefeated at home. So that came down to the wire and actually went into overtime. So obviously the Pistons have given some teams some scares lately, but still, I think a loss to the Pistons for the Warriors at this point in the season would be completely catastrophic. And the final piece of terrible news is that Chris Paul actually went down with an injury in that win against the Pistons. He actually fractured his hand on Friday, and he should be out about 4 to 6 weeks, which sadly, it's just kind of par for the course with Chris Paul. Hand, finger injuries, wrist as well, I believe. He's had all of them. Has kind of been the kryptonite for Chris Paul in an oft-injured career the past several years. So they're going to be without their floor general off the bench for the foreseeable future. So where does that leave us, right? You got some young players that are unhappy, a team that's sliding, they're getting Draymond back, but they're immediately losing Chris Paul. Where does that kind of put us at, and what is the panic meter for the Warriors? Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, with of course 10 being like, DEFCON 1 or whatever, like absolute panic, the panic meter I would put at is about 7.5. So it's bad. And I think the big takeaway, more so than the arbitrary number I just, described to you guys, is that I no longer think that the Warriors are contenders unless they make a move at the deadline. Like, again, I'm going to go through my tier rankings probably as soon as next episode, and I cannot in good faith put the Golden State Warriors in the contenders tier unless they make a real move. Again, they've had a good offseason. They've had a lot of things go right for them, and they just can't seem to get in a flow with this offense and this rotation. And I think the huge concern is the lack of size. I think that is definitely the Warriors' biggest problem, which is, I think a close second is obviously the happiness of these young players on the Warriors. But their lack of size is just so obvious, and I don't understand how stubborn the front office has been to get another big man for this team. I know the Warriors have been like the originators of small ball in the modern NBA and really shook things up about a decade ago at this point when they were the first truly successful team to go that small, win a championship with their lineup of death and all that cool stuff. But the league has kind of changed. The league is cyclical, and it seems like, big men are kind of having a renaissance in this NBA this year. And just look at the competition that Golden State is going to have to get through in the Western Conference. Obviously, Denver comes to mind. They have absolutely nobody to throw at Jokic, who's an absolute monster, and not many teams do. But at least having a sizable person to go out there, bang bodies with him, slow him down a little bit would definitely help their odds. Same thing with Minnesota. I believe still the top seed in the West at this point in time, headlined by Towns and Rudy Gobert. They have significant size. The Lakers, I know that they've had their own struggles lately, but still, the team that knocked them out last year. LeBron and Anthony Davis are bigger than basically everybody in the Warriors rotation. And even the top 3 seeds in the East, if you want to get that far ahead, where you look at Boston with Porzingis, Milwaukee with Giannis and Brook Lopez and Bobby Portis, and finally Philly with Joel Embiid as well. Like, the Warriors are not going to stand a chance as currently constructed against any of those teams that I just named. Now, there are a lot of teams in the same boat as Golden State where they need size. Like, I've been kind of preaching all year, I want the Celtics to get another big, but I do kind of like what I've seen from Kata lately, I must say. But I would still love for the Celtics to sign another big. I think OKC is another candidate to trade for another big man as well, because really, besides Chet, they have nobody else with size, and they are logging a lot of minutes on Chet. But nobody needs a big man as much as the Warriors. So, who's out there for Golden State? I know Jared Allen seems to be floated in a ton of trade rumors with all the turmoil that's been going on in Cleveland, and the fact that that double big lineup with Allen and Mobley has not been as successful as the front office of the Cavs has hoped. So I've seen Jared Allen thrown in a bunch of fake trades. Isaiah Stewart for the Pistons would be a really nice pickup for any of those teams, especially Golden State. I think he would add some much needed size to that team. Maybe even Daniel Gafford down in Washington. He's kind of the only, center that the Wizards really have at this point in time. So maybe they'd be hesitant to give him up, but at the same time, Washington has no chance at all, so I don't really know what they'd be playing for. But those 3 guys just kind of come to mind. But more so, it's just the willingness for the Warriors to actually make a move. Like, you look at their core young guys, which I would say is, again, they're 2 rookies in Podziemski, Trace Jackson-Davis, Moses Moody, and Jonathan Kuminga. I think Kerr needs to cut bait on at least one of those guys. Like, at this point in time, it looks like Moody would be the favorite to be traded. He was a guy I was obviously really high on in past years, but I think he's become a little bit more redundant, especially with how good Podziemski's been lately. Like, do it. I just want the Warriors front office to go all in. Make a move at the deadline. There's not a singular team in the league that needs to make a move more than Golden State right now. Like, you have Steph Curry. You have a top 10 to 15 player all time on your roster. And especially when you're a team that has achieved a level of success, right? You're not like the Pistons that haven't won in forever, or a team that just, again, hasn't really got to the pinnacle of the NBA. Like, when you're a Warriors team that's won, 4 championships in the last decade, there's a certain standard that you abide to, right? Like the fans are not really happy with just being competitive. They want to compete for championships year after year when you have a player as good as Steph Curry, who again, I think is just right where he was a few years ago when he was winning MVP and all that good stuff. Like he really hasn't lost a step yet. So you don't want to be that team that blows it up early or was so committed to bringing in this young talent. Like who cares if you're competitive, 4 or 5 years down the road after Steph retires? Like you had an all-time great. Wouldn't you rather have just maximized the window for a truly special player that you had, like the homegrown talent like Steph? I feel like if I was a fan of that team, I would absolutely want them to just trade it all. I mean, as far as I can tell, it looks like they have 5 future first-round picks, but those picks will only add value as the Warriors prove to go more all-in for the next couple years. You know what I mean? Like, if it looks like they're kind of throwing away some of their younger pieces, those picks in 2028 and 2029 are only going to add value because it's going to become apparent that this team is trying to win right now. And I think that that's exactly what they need to do. I don't know what they're holding on to. They've obviously had some turnover in the front office since the whole, 2 timelines thing came out and they thought they were just going to dominate the NBA for the last decade. But I think the time has come for them, again, to go all in. Now, I know that I was just awfully negative about the Warriors because I believe they are objectively in a really tough situation at this moment in time. The reason I gave them a 7.5 on the panic meter and not an 8 or 9 or 10 out of 10 is because I do think that there's obviously a roadmap for them to turn this thing around. Like I was saying, obviously, trading one of their young pieces, going all in for the next couple of years and trying to maximize the twilight of Steph's career here. I know a lot of people have kind of floated Draymond Green and trade rumors and all that stuff, and Clay as well. I just don't know what the return for those guys at this point in time would be. And I think that, again, veteran players like Clay and Draymond who have so much chemistry with Steph, I believe that they are going to be more valuable for the Golden State Warriors than they would be for any other team, even other contending teams in the league. And especially when you consider some of the recent struggles for Draymond Green. I'm sure his trade value has dropped. He obviously has been dealing with some stuff mentally. I would imagine that has resulted in him being so erratic on the court. So I don't think they should trade Clay. I don't think that they should trade Draymond. I think that they should just move on from their draft capital, move on from some of their young players, and just do everything they can to fortify this roster around Steph. I think there's definitely some real questions around Steve Kerr as well. Obviously, he's seeming to struggle managing the egos, managing the personality of the people in this locker room, especially some of the younger guys. And it's a frustrating situation to be. I think that they one of the problems that they don't have is not a lot of depth. I think that, again, like we talked about, having those 2 rookies come into the fold and having Dario Saric, it's not like they're a super thin team by any means. He's just struggling to find the right rotation of guys. So maybe they can do a 2-for-1 of some young guys and some role players to make salaries meet and bring in a big man like I just talked about. Bring in another 3-and-D, wing player or something like that is always a benefit to a team like Golden State. And just find those guys, find that 5 to 8 man rotation that the Warriors want. If you can get that clear closing unit out there, that would be great. But I think that there is steps that the Warriors need to take at this point in time because, again, I do not believe that they are contenders for the NBA championship unless they start making some moves at the deadline. So that just about does it for me, guys. That is obviously my Warriors deep dive, my Warriors panic meter here. We will talk about them a little bit more. We'll see how the next, couple weeks goes with Draymond coming back into the fold. But we're going to actually talk about all the teams in the NBA on our next episode. I am planning on doing a mid-season tier ranking. Haven't done that since basically this time last year, which is crazy. So excited to see how that turns out. But before I let you guys go, be sure to follow @WordsWithWallace on everything. That includes YouTube, that includes Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. And now on TikTok as well. I did cave. Follow @WordsWithWallace on TikTok. I am a complete boomer. No idea what I'm doing on that site. I'm basically just posting the reels that I normally do on social media. So if you have any TikTok tips, the DMs are open. You guys know where to find me. But be sure to follow Words with Wallace on TikTok as well. And I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.